The 11th century, spanning from 1001 MI to 1100 MC under the Julian calendar, marked the first century of the second millennium. In Europe, this was the early High Middle Ages. The Byzantine Empire, after a brief resurgence, entered a period of decline, while Norman influence spread across much of the continent. The century also saw the growing power of influential popes and a defining moment in Christian history, the Great Schism, formally dividing the Latin West and the Byzantine East into the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. In the East, Song Dynasty China and the Islamic world both reached the peak of their classical eras in science, technology, philosophy, and literature. Yet in China, political rivalries at the Song court stirred unrest. Korea's Goryeo kingdom thrived but faced pressure from the Liao dynasty in Manchuria. In Western Asia, the Seljuk Turks rose to power over the weakened Abbasid Caliphate, while the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt, the Ghaznavids in Central Asia, and India's mighty Chola dynasty reached their height. Towards the century's end, the First Crusade was launched. In Japan, the Fujiwara clan maintained dominance, while in the Americas, the Toltec and Mixtec civilizations flourished in Central America. The Mississippian culture expanded across North America, and in South America, the Tiwanaku Empire collapsed, giving way to the Huari culture. As the 12th century approached, the stage was set for further crusades, the continued rise of powerful empires, and an age of intellectual revival in both East and West. The 12th century, spanning from 1101 to 1200 in the Julian calendar, was part of the High Middle Ages, a period of cultural, religious, and political transformation across much of the known world. In Europe, this era overlapped with what is often called the Golden Age of the Cistercians, a powerful monastic order that promoted agricultural innovation, architectural refinement, and religious influence far beyond their monasteries. The Catholic Church's authority was at its height, shaping politics as much as faith. This was also a period of renewed intellectual activity, with the rise of medieval universities in places like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford, laying foundations for Europe's future centers of learning. The Golden Age of Islam continued to flourish, particularly in Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus, where science, philosophy, architecture, and literature thrived. Scholars translated classical Greek works into Arabic and Latin, bridging cultures and preserving knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. In East Asia, the Song dynasty faced a dramatic turning point when the Jurchens invaded, forcing the court to flee south and marking the division between the northern and southern Song. Despite the political fracture, southern Song China continued to be a hub of art, printing, trade, and technological progress, while the north came under the control of the Jin dynasty. Further south, the Khmer Empire in Cambodia reached new heights under King Suryavarman II, commissioning the vast temple complex of Angkor Wat, one of the most remarkable architectural feats of the age. In the Middle East, the Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt was replaced by the Ayyubid dynasty, founded by the famed Saladin, who would later become a central figure in the Crusades. The Islamic world also saw the rise of the Ghurid Empire and the continued influence of the Ghaznavids, leading to major Muslim conquests in the Indian subcontinent towards the century's close. Meanwhile, in Japan, the power of the imperial court began to wane as the warrior class, the samurai, gained increasing influence, setting the stage for the country's medieval era. In the Americas, great cultures such as the Toltecs remained influential in Mesoamerica, while the Mississippian culture in North America continued to expand its network of trade and mound-building cities. The dawn of the 13th century would bring even greater upheavals, from the surge of the Mongol Empire to intensified crusading wars, reshaping the political and cultural map of the medieval world. The 13th century, from 1201 MCCI to 1300 MCCC in the Julian calendar, was a period of sweeping change across much of the world. The Mongol Empire, founded by Genghis Khan, expanded to become the largest contiguous land empire in history, stretching from Eastern Asia to Eastern Europe. Under leaders such as Hulagu Khan, Mongol conquest reshaped the Muslim world, most notably with the Siege of Baghdad in 1258 and the destruction of the House of Wisdom. In West Africa, the Mali Empire rose to prominence, while in the Indian subcontinent, the Delhi Sultanate extended its reach. Buddhist centers across northern India suffered decline after the campaigns of Bakhtiar Khilji. In Southeast Asia, the earliest Islamic states emerged, including Samudra Pasai, and the kingdoms of Sukhothai and Hanthawaddy began their rise to regional dominance. In Europe, the High Middle Ages reached their peak. Cultural, legal, and religious life flourished alongside economic growth. The later Crusades, though largely unsuccessful in reclaiming the Holy Land, fueled the Reconquista in Iberia and strengthened a shared sense of Christendom. The Teutonic Order advanced into Prussia, Estonia, and Livonia, converting local populations to Christianity. Across Europe's new universities, thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas shaped scholasticism, blending reason and faith. In England, King John signed the Magna Carta, laying a cornerstone for the idea of equality under the law. In East Asia, the Southern Song dynasty began the century strong but eventually fell to the Mongols, becoming part of the Yuan dynasty. Japan's Kamakura shogunate famously repelled two Mongol invasions in 1274 and 1281, aided by fierce resistance and the so-called divine winds, typhoons that destroyed much of the invaders' fleets. Korea's Goryeo Kingdom endured Mongol attacks before becoming a client state of the UN. Across the Americas and Africa, powerful states and cultures thrived. In North America, the Mississippian city of Cahokia may have rivaled 13th century London in population. In the Andes, the Kingdom of Cusco began its rise during the late Intermediate period. The Mayan world entered its late post-classic era, while in Africa, the Kanem Empire reached its height, and both the Solomonic dynasty in Ethiopia and the Kingdom of Zimbabwe were founded. The 14th century would open with both opportunity and catastrophe, as shifting empires, growing trade networks, and unforeseen disasters began to shape the course of the late medieval world. The 14th century, from 1301 MCCCI to 1400 MCD, was an age of turmoil, transformation, and shifting power across much of the world. It is estimated that more than 45 million people died during this century through a combination of political conflict and devastating natural disasters, affecting both Europe and the remnants of the Mongol Empire. In Europe, the most catastrophic blow came with the Black Death, which claimed some 25 million lives, wiping out roughly a third of the continent's population. This century also saw the outbreak of the 100 Years' War between England and France, a conflict born from the death of King Charles IV of France and the claim to the throne by England's Edward III. The period is often seen as the height of chivalry and a time when distinct national identities for England and France began to take shape. It also marked the earliest stirrings of the Italian Renaissance, while in the East, a new power, the Ottoman Empire, was rising. In Asia, the Mongol Empire fractured further. The Yuan dynasty was driven out of China, retreating to Mongolia, while the Ilkhanate collapsed. The Chagatai Khanate split into two, and the Golden Horde lost its dominance in Eastern Europe. Out of this fractured political landscape emerged another formidable force, Tamerlane, or Timur, who built the Timurid Empire, the third largest empire ever created by a single ruler. His campaigns are estimated to have caused the deaths of 17 million people, about 5% of the world's population at the time. Yet alongside this brutality came the Timurid Renaissance, a flourishing of art, science, and architecture. In the Arab world, historian Ibn Khaldun laid the foundations of modern sociology, while the famed traveler Ibn Battuta chronicled his journeys across Africa, Asia, and Europe. In India, the Bengal Sultanate broke away from the Delhi Sultanate, becoming one of the wealthiest trading powers of the era. In Africa, the Mali Empire reached its height under Mansa Musa I, whose legendary wealth, fueled by vast gold production, has made him one of the richest figures in recorded history. Across the Atlantic, in the Americas, the Mexica founded the city of Tenochtitlan, which would one day grow into the heart of the Aztec Empire. Meanwhile, in North America, the great Mississippian city of Cahokia was abandoned. As the 15th century began, new empires were rising, old powers were waning, and the age ahead would bring the fall of Constantinople, the height of the Renaissance, and the first voyages that would connect the world in ways never seen before. The 15th century, from 1401 MCDI to 1500 MD, was a turning point between the medieval and modern worlds. In Europe, it spanned the final phase of the late Middle Ages, the flowering of the early Renaissance, and the beginnings of the early modern period. Technological, cultural, and economic changes of this era laid the groundwork for what some historians call the European miracle of the centuries to follow. In Italy, innovations in architectural perspective transformed art, while modern banking and accounting began to take shape. The Hundred Years' War came to a close with a decisive French victory at the Battle of Castillon. In England, the financial strain left by the war contributed to the Wars of the Roses, a series of dynastic struggles that ended with Henry Tudor's victory over Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field, ushering in the Tudor dynasty. One of the most significant events of the century was the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. This ended the Byzantine Empire, sent Greek scholars and classical texts streaming into Italy, and, along with Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the printing press, helped fuel the Renaissance. The Catholic Church resolved its decades-long Western schism at the Council of Constance, but unrest tied to the Hussite movement foreshadowed the religious upheavals of the next century. In Iberia, the Christian Reconquista ended over 7 centuries of Islamic rule, uniting Spain under Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella. The final defeat of Muslim Granada was followed by forced conversions and rebellion, cementing Christian control of the peninsula. Trade and exploration began to shift on a global scale. The wealth of the Bengal Sultanate had long attracted European merchants, but the rise of the Ottoman Empire and its trade restrictions spurred a search for alternative routes to Asia. This quest led Christopher Columbus westward toward the Americas and Vasco da Gama around Africa to India, voyages that would transform global commerce. In China, the Ming Dynasty reached its territorial peak under the Yongle Emperor, who ordered the construction of the Forbidden City and sent Admiral Zheng He on vast maritime expeditions across the Indian Ocean. In Africa, the Christian kingdoms of Nubia fell to the spread of Islam, leaving only Alodia, which would itself collapse in the next century. The Mali Empire's influence waned under pressure from the rising Songhai Empire. Across the Atlantic, the Aztec and Inca empires stood at the height of their power, unaware that the first European ships had arrived in the Americas, beginning a new and irreversible chapter in world history. The 16th century would see these encounters accelerate as old worlds collided with new, empires expanded across oceans, and the modern age truly began to take shape. The 16th century from 1501 MDI to 1600 MDC was an age of artistic brilliance, scientific revolution, global exploration, and deep religious division. In Europe, the Renaissance reached its height. Artists, authors, and scientists shaped disciplines that would define the modern world. In astronomy, Nicholas Copernicus proposed a heliocentric universe, challenging the Earth-centered model of Ptolemy and Aristotle. Tycho Brahe's careful observations disproved the idea of celestial spheres, while Galileo Galilei championed the new sciences, inventing the first thermometer and making groundbreaking discoveries in physics and astronomy. These achievements drove the scientific revolution and began to erode long-held views of the cosmos. Overseas, Spain and Portugal built vast colonial empires. The Spanish dominated the Greater Antilles, Mexico, and Peru, and opened a Pacific trade route connecting the Americas with Asia. The Portuguese controlled trade between Brazil, Africa, and their holdings in the Indies. France and England began to claim territory in North America and the Caribbean, while English and French privateers targeted Spanish and Portuguese treasure fleets. This competition for wealth and resources reflected the mercantilist view of the economy as a zero-sum game, fueling both European expansion and frequent wars. Religious unity in Europe shattered with the Protestant Reformation, which challenged the authority of the Catholic Church. Reformers such as Martin Luther and John Calvin reshaped Christian thought, while in England, Henry VIII's break from Rome established the Church of England. By the century's end, Europe was deeply divided along religious lines, setting the stage for the bloody conflicts of the 17th century, including the 30 Years' War. In the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire continued its expansion, and the Sultan adopted the title of Caliph. The Safavid dynasty in Persia, ruling in the name of Shia Islam, solidified an independent Persian identity distinct from the Sunni world. In South Asia, the Mughal Empire was founded by Babur, a descendant of both Timur and Genghis Khan. Under his successors Humayun and Akbar, it expanded to dominate most of the subcontinent. Other regional powers included the Sur Empire, the Deccan Sultanates, and the Rajput states. In East Asia, Japan endured the Sengoku period of civil war before unifying under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, while the Ming dynasty in China turned increasingly inward, clashing with Japan over Korea and battling Japanese piracy. In Africa, Christianity spread deeper into central and southern regions, while much of the continent remained free from European colonization until centuries later. The 17th century would see the rivalries born in this age intensify, as Europe's religious and political struggles intertwined with its expanding reach across the globe. The 17th century, from 1601 MDCI to 1700 MDCC, was a time of great contrasts, an age of artistic splendor, scientific breakthroughs, imperial ambition, and devastating conflict. In Europe, the Baroque movement transformed music, art, and architecture, while Spain enjoyed the final phase of its golden age, and the Netherlands thrived during its own golden age of trade and culture. France entered its Grand Siècle under Louis XIV, whose reign dominated European politics. This was also the era of the scientific revolution, when scholars and inventors redefined humanity's understanding of the natural world. Global commerce expanded under the world's first public company and megacorporation, the Dutch East India Company, linking continents through trade and colonization. From the mid-century, Louis XIV consolidated absolute power in France, suppressing the nobility during the Fronde, and transforming Versailles into both a dazzling symbol of royal grandeur and a gilded cage for the aristocracy. With domestic order secured, he expanded France's borders and influence. In England, tensions between the monarchy and parliament erupted into the English Civil War, leading to the temporary overthrow of the monarchy and a shift in political power that would echo into the modern age. Scientific advances transformed the century. Figures such as Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, René Descartes, Blaise Pascal, Robert Boyle, Christian Huygens, Antonia van Leeuwenhoek, Robert Hooke, Isaac Newton, and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz made discoveries in physics, astronomy, biology, mathematics, and engineering. Inventions such as the telescope, microscope, calculating machines, and early studies of air pressure revolutionized knowledge and technology, while Newton's laws of motion and theory of gravitation reshaped science itself. Overseas, European colonization accelerated. In the Americas, Spain and Portugal exploited vast silver deposits, driving both wealth and inflation in Europe. Colonization spread deeper into North America, the Caribbean, and South America, while European traders expanded their presence in Southeast and East Asia. Powers such as the Mataram Sultanate and Aceh Sultanate held regional dominance, and European influence contributed to political change in places like Ayutthaya. The Islamic world's great gunpowder empires, the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal, all expanded their territories. In South Asia, the Vijayanagara Empire fell, and the Deccan Sultanates declined, while the Dutch colonized Ceylon and fought hostilities with the Kingdom of Kandy. The Ottoman Empire suffered its first major territorial losses in Europe with the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, ceding much of Hungary to the Habsburgs. In East Asia, Tokugawa Ieyasu established the Tokugawa shogunate in Japan, beginning the Edo period and enforcing the isolationist Sakoku policy. In China, the Ming dynasty collapsed under pressure from Manchu forces, who established the Qing dynasty. Years of civil war and economic strain followed before stability returned at the century's close. This was also a time of intense warfare, including the 30 Years' War, the Dutch-Portuguese War, the Great Turkish War, the 9 Years' War, the Mughal-Safavid Wars, and the Qing conquest of Ming loyalist strongholds. The 18th century would inherit this complex world, one of expanding empires, rapid scientific progress, and shifting political orders, setting the stage for revolutions both industrial and political. The 18th century, from 1701 MDCCI to 1800 MDCCCC, was a century of revolution in ideas, industry, and politics. Enlightenment philosophy challenged long-standing monarchies and aristocratic systems, while the Industrial Revolution, beginning in the mid-century, transformed economies, societies, and the environment. European colonization intensified across the Americas, Africa, Asia, and Oceania, driving mass migrations in the Age of Sail. The Atlantic slave trade expanded to unprecedented levels, even as it declined in places such as Russia and China. In Europe, the Age of Enlightenment spread ideals of reason, liberty, and progress. Monarchs initially welcomed some of these ideas, but the outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789 and the radical reign of terror that followed saw many turn against them. France's revolutionary government faced coalitions of monarchies determined to halt its spread. Britain emerged as the dominant European power after victories in conflicts such as the War of the Spanish Succession and the Seven Years' War, though its authority over the 13 colonies crumbled with the American Revolution. Meanwhile, the once mighty Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was partitioned out of existence by Russia, Prussia, and Austria. In West Asia, Persia under Nader Shah achieved major military successes, while the Ottoman Empire's long period of peace from 1740 to 1768 left it unprepared for modern European warfare, leading to defeats against Russia. In South Asia, the Mughal Empire declined rapidly after the death of Aurangzeb. The Maratha Confederacy rose in influence but faced defeats at the hands of Ahmad Shah Durrani. Increasingly, European powers, particularly the British East India Company, expanded control, culminating in the Anglo-Mysore Wars and the annexation of much of southern India by century's end. East Asia saw the High Qing era, marked by territorial expansion, population growth, and a flourishing of culture and trade. Japan's Tokugawa shogunate maintained its isolationist policy while experiencing a peaceful Pax Tokugawa period, enriched by scientific and artistic influences through limited contact with Dutch traders at Nagasaki. In Southeast Asia, wars such as the Konbaung Ayutthaya and Tai-Son conflicts reshaped regional powers, while the Dutch East India Company deepened its hold over the Mataram Sultanate. In Africa, the Ethiopian Empire entered the Zemene Mesafint, a time of fragmented noble rule. West African states such as the Oyo Empire remained heavily involved in the Atlantic slave trade. In Oceania, the late 18th century marked the beginning of European colonization of Australia and New Zealand. In the Americas, the United States declared independence in 1776, with George Washington becoming its first president in 1789. Figures such as Benjamin Franklin gained fame for their inventions, including the lightning rod and bifocal glasses. Elsewhere, uprisings like that of Tupac Amaru II in Peru challenged Spanish colonial rule. The 19th century would carry forward these sweeping changes, witnessing the spread of industrial power, the rise of nationalism, and a wave of political revolutions that would reshape the modern world. The 19th century, from 1801 MDCCCI to 1900 MCM, was a century of dramatic transformation. Slavery was abolished across much of Europe and the Americas. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in the late 18th century, spread to continental Europe, North America, and Japan, reshaping economies, societies, and cities. Mid-century brought the Second Industrial Revolution, accelerating urbanization, productivity, and global trade. The Catholic Church responded to the growing influence of secularism and modernism with the First Vatican Council, while Christian missionaries expanded their reach into Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. In the Middle East and beyond, the old Islamic gunpowder empires declined as European imperialism expanded. Britain, France, Germany, Russia, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Italy, Japan, and the United States emerged as major powers. The Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Mughal empires collapsed, while Britain rose to global dominance after defeating Napoleonic France. The British and Russian empires expanded their reach, with Russia pushing into the Caucasus and Central Asia. The Ottoman Empire attempted modernization through the Tanzimat reforms, but continued to lose territory in the Balkans and North Africa. In India, the decline of powers such as the Maratha and Sikh empires and resentment toward the British East India Company led to the Indian Rebellion of 1857. The company was dissolved, and India came under direct rule as the British Raj. The 19th century was the height of the British Empire, controlling a fifth of the world's land and a quarter of its population. Pax Britannica brought unprecedented global trade, but also deepened colonial exploitation. By the century's end, Britain, France, Germany, and the United States had claimed nearly all of Oceania. In East Asia, China's Qing dynasty endured its century of humiliation under foreign powers. Japan, after the Meiji Restoration, rapidly modernized and defeated China in the First Sino-Japanese War. Advances in medicine, science, and technology fueled population growth, with Europe's numbers doubling from 200 million to over 400 million. The century saw rapid progress in communication and industry. The telegraph and Morse code in the 1830s, the telephone in 1876, the light bulb in 1878, and the spread of railroads transforming transport and commerce. Electricity, steel production, and new scientific understanding in fields from chemistry to biology laid the foundation for the 20th century's technological leaps. Slavery's decline was one of the century's defining moral shifts. Britain abolished slavery in its empire in 1834 and used its navy to suppress the global slave trade. The United States abolished slavery after its Civil War in 1865, Russia ended serfdom in 1861, and Brazil followed in 1888. Mass migration reshaped continents. Around 70 million people left Europe, most heading to the United States. New cities such as Chicago and Melbourne grew from nothing into major population centers, while London became the largest city in the world, its population rising from 1 million to 6.7 million. Sports such as football, rugby, cricket, and baseball were codified and spread worldwide, often through British influence. The century also brought new political realities. Liberalism became a leading reform movement in Europe. The Ottoman retreat from the Balkans created new states, Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Romania, following the Russo-Turkish War, itself preceded by the Crimean War. European powers completed the exploration and mapping of almost all the world's land, with only the most extreme polar regions left uncharted. The 20th century would inherit these transformations, an industrialized, interconnected, and competitive world on the brink of even greater upheavals in technology, politics, and war. The 20th century, from 1901 MCMI to 2000 was the last century of the second millennium and one of the most transformative periods in human history. It saw unprecedented advances in science, technology, and communication, alongside global conflicts of a scale never before witnessed. The century began with 1.6 billion people and ended with more than 6 billion, as improvements in medicine, food production, and living standards reshaped societies worldwide. Two world wars defined the first half of the century. World War I introduced tanks, chemical weapons, and aerial combat, leaving up to 17 million dead and dismantling the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires. The Russian Revolution brought the world's first communist state, the Soviet Union. Fascism rose in Italy, Germany, and Spain, leading to World War II, sparked by Nazi expansion and joined by Japan's imperial ambitions. After 6 years of fighting and more than 60 million dead, the war ended with the defeat of the Axis powers and the first and only use of atomic weapons in warfare. From the ashes emerged two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, whose ideological rivalry shaped the Cold War. Europe was divided by the Iron Curtain, Germany split in two, and an arms race began, with nuclear stockpiles capable of destroying the planet. Unable to fight directly, the two powers clashed through proxy wars in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and beyond. The Cold War also fueled rapid technological competition, leading to space exploration, advances in computing, and the early foundations of the Internet. The latter half of the century saw the dismantling of colonial empires as nations across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean gained independence. Globalization accelerated, spreading trade, culture, and political influence across borders. American culture, from Hollywood films to jazz, rock, and later hip-hop, became a worldwide export, while the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991 ended the Cold War and brought dramatic political and economic change to much of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Scientific understanding underwent a revolution. Einstein's theory of relativity and the rise of quantum physics transformed our view of the universe. Medical breakthroughs, including antibiotics and vaccines, nearly eradicated diseases such as smallpox, while computers, telecommunications, and the internet reshaped work, communication, and entertainment. Automobiles, airplanes, home appliances, and mass media became everyday features of life. Social change was profound. Women gained the right to vote in many countries. Racial segregation and colonial rule came under sustained challenge. And by the century's end, legal equality for women and minorities was established in much of the world. The sexual revolution of the 1960s and 1970s transformed attitudes toward relationships and sexuality, while movements for LGBTQ+ rights began to gain momentum. Yet the century was also marked by tragedy. Genocides, political purges, and state violence claimed hundreds of millions of lives, from the Holocaust to the Soviet purges, Mao's campaigns in China, and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Conflicts from 1914 to 1945 alone caused tens of millions of deaths, while disease, including the Spanish flu, malaria, and the HIV/AIDS epidemic, continued to claim lives globally. Environmental awareness grew as industrialization and fossil fuel use brought pollution and climate change concerns to the forefront. By the 1990s, most of the world had access to accurate maps of even the most remote regions. Space exploration had put humans on the moon, and nearly instantaneous global communication was possible. As the 21st century approached, the world was more interconnected, technologically advanced, and politically complex than ever before, carrying forward the achievements and the lessons of a century that had reshaped human destiny. And that's every century since Christ. 2,000 years, countless changes, and here we are. Thanks for watching, and if there's another topic or time period you'd like me to cover, drop it in the comments.